Hey everybody, welcome back to the I Play 2 podcast. I'm your host, Rob Adler. This week, former San Francisco Giant and current Florida Southern baseball coach Lance Niekro joins the show. In 1999, he was the MVP of the Cape Cod League, winning the award over future MLB All-Stars like Chase Utley and Mark Teixeira. In 2005, with the Giants, Lance had 12 homers and nearly 50 RBI. In 11 seasons as Florida Southern head coach, Lance has amassed 300 wins. His father, Joe Niekro, had 21 wins in 1979 and was an MLB All-Star, while his uncle, Phil Niekro, won over 300 games and is enshrined in the Baseball Hall of Fame. Lance, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
And thank you for being on the show. My first question is probably kind of an obvious one here, but how did you get into baseball?
I guess that could be an obvious one with my family background, but baseball was just how I was brought up. My parents never forced me to play, but it's just something that I always wanted to do. When I was born, 1979 was kind of right in the prime of my dad's career in Houston, after the year that he was the All-Star. And I was around big league locker rooms and big league players from the day I was born, and it was just something that I always wanted to do.
1979, that was the year that your dad and your uncle led the National League in victories, if I'm correct.
I think it was. I know Phil had some rough years. The Braves weren't very good back then. I get a kick out of going back and looking at his records and his ERAs and his complete games from those years in the 70s with the Braves. And I think he had one year where he had 20 wins and 20 losses with like a 3-something ERA. So that would be hard to do in today's game, but he definitely battled through and just pitched as much as he could. Both of them did.
Growing up and being in MLB clubhouses, what was that like for a kid?
Houston, I was really young when my dad was there. New York was the next team my dad played for. We could only go in if the Yankees won. We couldn't go in if they lost. So they weren't very good that year, so I didn't get to go in too much. And then he got traded to Minnesota, middle of 1987, and Tom Kelly was really good about letting kids in the locker room. I always lived in Florida, but whenever I'd go to Minnesota, they'd have a locker that I could use and go out and shag BP. I got the bat boy whenever I was in town. That's where most of my memories are from. One of my biggest memories was Kirby Puckett. He was 34. My dad was 36, so my locker was in between the two. And Kirby would take me out during batting practice and lift me up on his shoulders and have someone throw a ball up over the fence and let me try to rob it like he was famous for doing. So I have a lot of memories from Kirby and just that year in general. When my dad got traded, Minnesota was in last place in the division, ended up winning their division, going to the playoffs, and winning the World Series that year. And that was the only appearance that my dad or my uncle had in a World Series out of 46 years of professional baseball between the two. So a lot of memories from Minnesota and memories of my dad being able to not only go to the World Series, but win the World Series.
Because the World Series was in October, were you able to attend any of the games with school going on?
I did. I was up there for the playoffs and the World Series. Did not go on the road, but I think I was there for about a total of 2.5, maybe 3 weeks. And I was only in third grade, so it wasn't that big of a deal to miss school. And the school was very willing to let me go, so they just sent me with a bunch of classwork. And I don't know if I really did it all, but I know I was supposed to.
What was it like to be 8 years old and be along for the ride with your dad for what ended up being a World Series win?
I knew it was something special just with the electricity that was going around Minnesota at that point. At that time, no professional sports team had won any championship in Minnesota. So the Twins fans were great. Metrodome was packed every night. I knew it was something special just from that and from seeing my dad's expression and the other players' expression after they won the World Series and being in that locker room after Game 7 and being in the ticker tape parade a couple of days later. I didn't understand the magnitude of it just because I was so young. If I were to experience it in my playing career or now, I would understand the significance. I knew it was just something really special just by everyone's reactions at that time.
You mentioned Kirby Puckett, and I assume along with your dad and your uncle. Who are some of the other people that you idolized growing up in sports?
In Houston, it was Jose Cruz. I always remember him and still get a chance every once in a while to see him. And I had a chance to play with Jose Jr. in San Francisco for a year. And then in New York, it was none other than Don Mattingly. And then in Minnesota, it was Kirby Puckett, Frank Viola, Bert Blyleven, Jeff Reardon was their closer. That was kind of the first time I got to see the funny quirks that a closer has, seeing him on his daily routine. But Kirby really sticks out in my mind, and Kent Herbeck was another one. He was a younger guy at that time, but we used to go over to his house up in Minnesota and go fishing. Some good memories with him also.
You mentioned Jeff Reardon. What's the most memorable quirk to you?
I just remember he always carried this weighted ball with him. It was a little silver ball. I don't know how much it weighed, but he would always carry it with him. And I seem to remember the steps that went down to the dugout from the locker room. He would always roll the ball down the step. It's one of those things, don't step on the white line. Just something maybe part of his routine that he did. I know now it was to get his arm loose, and he probably played catch with it before he picked up a baseball. But for me, it's just one of those things I just remember.
I know this is a little bit controversial, but I remember watching as a kid and laughing about it. The nail file, or the emery board, I guess you'd call it. What was that whole situation like? Because I imagine there was some backlash off the field.
I remember for some reason I went down to my mom's room that night and she was watching the game. I believe they were in California. And I'd walked in her room right when it was happening. And she basically told me to be quiet. And she was trying to figure out what was going on. And he carried a picture of me and my sister in his back pocket along with an emery board. And he carried that emery board until the day he died. So he ends up getting ejected, 10-game suspension. He went on David Letterman for it. So definitely some positives came out of it and notoriety from it. We went to Minnesota for his first game back to be eligible to pitch. And my mom was really nervous about it. And the fans loved it in Minnesota. They handed out first 10,000 fans or whatever it was, got an emery board. On the back of it, it said, "Say it ain't so, Joe," the Niekro file. I still have a handful of them that I keep in my drawer in my bathroom. A bunch of people made posters, and they really embraced it. It was something that made my dad famous. Baseball players didn't get the notoriety back then that they get now, and it was something that people remember, just like you're asking me the question right now. So down the road, I asked my dad when I was older, I said, "Did you actually file the ball?" And he told me no, and I didn't need to ask him again. But it was just illegal to have it on him, and he always did. He had it until he died.
After your dad retired, how involved was he with developing you into becoming the player that you did?
He never pushed me to play, but I always wanted to, and he was always willing to go out. In Little League, when he retired, he was always there to help, whether it was just helping coach or going out to the fields probably every day to throw to me and play catch and hit me ground balls. And then as I got older into high school, he helped coach on my high school team. Into college, he helped coach on my college team. And it's nothing that he was trying to overstep boundaries and that he deserved to do it because of his career, but people were always willing to have him around, and he was always willing to help. And it was not only great for me, but it was great for everyone that I played with. And not many people get to have a guy that helps them, whether it's a Saturday afternoon at the fields or a practice on a Tuesday night. A guy that played over 20 years in the big leagues to go out and help them. Not many people get that. So something that I try to remember when my kids come home, and it's in Florida right now. It feels like it's temperatures 110, 115 every day, and they're wanting to go out to the field. And I'm like, oh man, it's so hot out. But I try to remember that's what my dad did for me, and what I want to do for my kids.
Yeah, here in Dallas, it's been 105, so I can relate to you on the weather.
This summer's been terrible.
As you were getting older, when was the first time that you thought, hey, maybe I could do this at the college level or maybe even in the majors?
When I was in high school, probably my junior year, started getting some letters from colleges, started putting some weight on, and I didn't know at that point whether it was going to be pitching or hitting. My senior year of high school, I really transitioned into a position player and into a hitter. I knew I was going to go to the next level at college. I wasn't even thinking about professional baseball at that time. It was more college. I got drafted in the 13th round out of high school by the Phillies. I decided to go to college. I went to Florida Southern here in Lakeland, where I coach now. Even after my first year, I wasn't too sure about getting drafted. I thought I might, but I wasn't sure. But after my summer in Cape Cod is when I really knew, okay, I got a chance to be first rounder, second rounder, maybe third rounder. Had a lot of eyes on me, a lot of scouts, a lot of advisors making contact. And at that point, I knew I had a chance. Unless I got hurt, I was going to go to the next level. And then I got into minor leagues. It was a whole different ballgame. The playing field was a lot more even, and you really had to work hard to advance. I had some injuries that set me back first couple of years with shoulder surgeries and broken wrist. And then in 2003, I had a pretty decent year. That was my year to go on to the 40-man. I was fortunate enough to get my first taste in September of 2003.
Couple of things I'm going to follow up on here. First is for listeners who might not be totally familiar with it, could you talk a little bit more about what the Cape Cod League is and the importance of doing well there?
College summer leagues, there's a lot of them out there now. When I was coming up, there wasn't too many. But Cape Cod has notoriously been the most prestigious league to go to. I wasn't even supposed to go to the Cape. I actually had one coach from a team in the Cape told my college coach that the Cape isn't a place for Division II players. So I was supposed to go to the North Woods League, and I was actually driving up to the North Woods League, and my college coach called and said, "Hey, we got a buddy that coaches in Orleans by the name of Don Norris. They were supposed to have Mark Teixeira come play first and third base, but he's going to Team USA, so they need corner infielder for a few weeks, basically, until they decide the Team USA roster." So I kind of veered to the right, went to the Cape. First 2 weeks, I was playing really well. I don't know what happened with Team USA, but I know Mark came to the Cape, and I was playing so well that they decided to rotate me and Mark between first and third base every day, which was a great experience for both of us. Being third basemen in college, we got to learn another position, kind of fed off each other, and both had great summers and became really close that summer and kept in contact, and still to this day. Not as often as you get older and have family, you don't keep in touch with people as often, but we still text each other every once in a while, and just to say, hey. Obviously his career went a little better than mine did, but it was great for me to be around someone that had the accolades that he had at that point, just the years that he had had at Georgia Tech, the recognition from Team USA. And for me, it was a huge boost to come from a small Division II school and to go up to the Cape against players like that and excel and eventually win the MVP.
Away from the field that summer, what's a favorite memory you have with Teixeira or any other teammate?
There was a group of us. We would go fishing almost every day. We had one of our assistant coaches named John Bonnell, owned a bed and breakfast right on an inlet off Cape Cod Bay. And we would wade out probably 100 yards onto this sandbar, and we would just cast out and catch bluefish and striped bass every day. And that's kind of what we do. That was our routine. We got into the minor league baseball routine. There was no class. Sleep in, we'd go fish, we'd go over to the field, we'd take a little batting practice, rest up, and play the game. The best memory for me was just hanging out with other guys on the team, meeting all these new guys, and going fishing. I grew up fishing with my dad, and it just kind of carried on to that summer.
You've gone fishing with Teixeira, your dad, Kent Herbeck. Who's the best fisherman of them all, or is it you?
Oh, jeez. I like to say me, but I can't claim that. My dad was an unbelievable fisherman. He fished hard. We fished in the backcountry down in South Florida with artificial bait, no live bait. And he could fish all day long. His stamina was amazing, and he always seemed to catch a keeper snook. And snook is what we fish for, and always seemed, no matter how bad the fishing was, he always seemed to catch at least one. So definitely have to give him the crown for that, and for him passing his love of fishing on to me and teaching me the basics of it. And my love of it now is something that I share with my kids, and I still have a group of buddies that every September we go down to the same place that my dad kind of found down in the Everglades, and that's where we go, and that's the style of fishing we do.
Is the place in your Everglades your favorite place to fish, or is there that dream spot that you like to get to once in a while?
That's it. It's actually Chokoloskee Island, which is in Everglades National Park. And you leave the dock at 6 in the morning, you come in at 6 at night, all through the backcountry. We don't go out into the Gulf of Mexico at all. And sometimes you don't see another boat all day, and you have no cell phone reception. It's old Florida. You escape from everything. I've had some incidences where you get stuck back there and you got to wait a while to try to find someone to tow you in, but that's the beauty of it. You just get away, and kind of whatever's on your mind at that time, you get away from it. Like I said, you don't have cell phone reception when you're in the boat. So these days with technology, how it is, it's hard to put the phone down. So when you get forced to do it, it's great.
You ever have a confrontation with an alligator?
Oh, I mean, this is Florida. There's alligators everywhere. I see a ton down there, and every once in a while we'll catch one, just joking around if it's a little one and fishing slow to feel something tugging your line. Maybe we'll try to hook the gator.
Going back to your college days, you played at Florida Southern. Was that the best recruiting offer you had, or who else was recruiting you?
Going through high school, I was getting a lot of attention really only from University of Florida and Troy in Alabama. I didn't understand why, but those were the two that really stuck out. After the draft, when I said I wasn't signing, I had a lot of schools come in and offer me walk-on spot or a low scholarship spot, which they said that the rumor was is that I was going to sign no matter what, which I don't know how that rumor was started. So I was a little disappointed. I kind of had some bigger schools in mind that I wanted to go to. But as it worked out, Florida Southern was great for me. It's a smaller school, had to go to class. They took roll just like in high school, which they still do, which was good for me because at that point, academics wasn't very appealing to me. So if I went to a bigger school where I didn't even have to go to class and the accountability wasn't there, who knows how my grades would have been and how my baseball career would have been after that. So it was something that worked out for me. Times have changed. Now, if you're a 13th rounder out of high school now, you can pretty much pick any school in the country to go to and you can go for free. So it's definitely changed since then, but it worked out for me.
Do you talk a little bit more about Florida Southern? Because it's a fairly small school, and I'm not sure how many people are as familiar with it as some other schools in Florida.
It's a Division II school in Florida. We're in the Sunshine State Conference, so every other school in our conference is in Florida. 2,500, 3,000 students, maybe a little more now. Small school, but people tend to like it for some of the reasons that I mentioned before. They stay on you with your academics. It's hard to slip through the cracks and fail. And the baseball tradition speaks for itself. We have 9 national championships, which is the most in Division II. I believe the second most in any division, maybe the third most now. But we have a strong reputation of going to the postseason, of guys getting drafted and moving on to the next level. Things have changed a little bit with that, with the draft being shortened to 20 rounds and transfer portal being crazy now. But we got a good facility, a good school, a great tradition. So we tend to get really good players in here and get a chance to play in the postseason almost every year.
You had mentioned that you were drafted by the Phillies in the 13th round. What made you decide that you wanted to go to college to play rather than go attempt to try to get a spot with the Phillies?
I didn't want to go to college. I didn't want to do any more schoolwork. That was kind of my dad's advice. They came in with an offer. I still remember they came in at $25,000 to sign, which to me sounded like a lot of money. And it was a decent amount back then, but my dad said, "You're not signing for $25,000. You can go to school." And I really thought throughout the summer they would come back in and up that offer to 50 or 75,000. I had a great summer that year playing on a couple of traveling teams in Florida. I did really well, and they never came back in. They had drafted J.D. Drew that year, so I think maybe they were trying to put all their money into him to try to get him signed. But I wanted to go. I wanted to sign, but my dad was really against it. Now my kids are huge Phillies fans for some reason. I think it's because of Bryce Harper. So we watch all the Phillies games now, and I actually told them about a week or so ago that I was drafted by the Phillies out of high school and didn't sign. And the look they gave me was a look you would never want your child to give you. Why did you not sign with the Phillies? That's our favorite team. So, well, if I'd have known that back then, maybe I would.
Being a third baseman and going to the Phillies and having to play in the shadow of the legacy of Mike Schmidt, that's kind of a hard thing to follow as well.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been. It's not something that I was even thinking about or considering at that point. But if I would have signed and got into the organization, progressed through, I'm sure it's something that would have been magnified more.
You're playing at Florida Southern. You have the good year in the Cape Cod League. What were the feelers that you were getting from major league teams of where you could be drafted?
I was hearing somewhere between the first and third rounds. Obviously, I wanted to be a first rounder. And I had a decent year that year at Florida Southern. I think I hit 360 with like 8 home runs. If I would have hit more home runs, maybe I would have been a first rounder. But at that point, I didn't really care. I just wanted the chance to go on. I definitely wanted to be in the top 3 rounds monetarily. Not to say that I was a high pick, but obviously the higher you drafted, the more money you're going to get. So something that I wanted, and went out there and I did what I needed to do to secure a spot in those top 3 rounds. But at that point, once I got drafted, my mind shifted on to now it's professional baseball. Now you got to start working even harder to try to move up the ladder.
What was the transition like from Division II baseball to the minors?
My first year in Salem Kaiser, which was short season ball for the Giants, I kind of just picked up where I left off. In the Cape, I hit 360. At Florida Southern, I hit 365. In Salem Kaiser, I hit 360 and won the batting title. Like, I was so locked in, it almost didn't really matter. I hadn't hit that adversity yet. Not saying that the talent wasn't there. I was just so locked in that I really didn't start hitting it until injuries came in my next year in San Jose in A-ball, and then in AA, another injury. I missed half a year both times. And then I would think in AAA, that was kind of a whole new ball game for me. You were playing with guys that have been playing for a long time in the minors or have been in the big leagues and have been sent down. And that's when you started playing with men. And that's when the game really started to speed up.
In 2001, you had a shoulder injury, correct? That kind of derailed your season?
Yeah, that was in San Jose. I dove for a ball down the line and up my right shoulder a little bit and had to have surgery. So I missed the whole second half of the season in A-ball 2001. And then next year, spring training, I went to Double-A and was doing pretty good. They had moved me to first. That was my first time going to first in professional baseball just because of my shoulder and some problems that I was having throwing. So I went to Double-A, played great defensively, hitting a little over 300. And then there was a bunt, and the pitcher threw it down the line. I tried to catch it and tag the base runner, and he ran into me and broke my wrist. So I missed the whole second half of that year also. So that was another year, another injury, missing half the year. It was frustrating, but something I really couldn't control.
For each of those injuries, what was the rehab process like for you?
For both of them, I went to Arizona to our spring training complex. They had a rehab facility there that all the minor leaguers that were out would go to, and we'd basically get up at 6 a.m., whatever it was, and we'd go to the rehab facility and work out. We'd get some rehab on whatever was hurt, and then you'd work out in the areas that you weren't hurt. So for me, both times it was an arm, so I would do a lot of running, a lot of lifting with my legs, a lot of ab work, and then as you progress and start to get healthier, they'd go over to the minor league facility and start throwing again or catching, or for guys that had leg injuries, they'd go over there and start their conditioning process with our trainers with the Giants. And both years, that's what I did.
You said that you had some throwing issues after your shoulder injury. Is that something that's kind of still lingered? Because oftentimes shoulder injuries never fully heal.
No, and it wasn't from my injury or from the surgery. It was just kind of the throwing technique that I came back with. I developed a little bit of a hitch, and it just didn't translate into throwing from third base. So that's why they moved me over to first. And it took a few years for it to correct itself and to get the muscle memory back. And I think 2004, maybe it was, I ended up playing third base a little bit in AAA. But at that point, I was definitely more natural at first base and more valuable at first base. My defense wasn't spectacular at third. So my primary focus was playing first, and if they needed me at third, I could play third.
In 2003, you got your first cup of coffee in the majors. What was it like to be told that you were going to the majors?
We were in Tucson, Arizona, on the Diamondbacks AAA team, and everyone knew this is when college were going to happen. And I remember one of the pitchers on our team, Luis Estrella, during the game or during batting practice, he came over and said, "Hey, I'll bet you a steak dinner that you're getting called up tonight. You don't want to jinx it." So I was like, okay, yeah, there's no chance I'm going up. I'll bet you. So after the game, Fred Stanley, our manager, calls me in, tells me I'm going up to the big leagues. I walk out, and Lewis was standing there and telling me that I owe him a steak dinner. And I ended up finding out that he had been in our manager's office earlier that day for some reason, and he saw the names on his desk of everyone that was going up. So he cheated. So he knew I was going up. So after the game, I called my mom and called my dad, even though it was early in the morning in Florida. I wanted them to be the first calls that I made. And of course, my dad was awake. He had known just from some of the coaches that were with the Giants. And one in particular, Carlos Alfonso, who he was in Houston with, had called my dad and told him that they were calling me up. So I think he was packing his bags and he was getting ready to go to the airport to meet me in San Francisco. And then, as chance would be, I flew from Tucson to Phoenix, and then from Phoenix to San Francisco, and we ended up being on the same flight from Phoenix to San Francisco, me and my dad.
Well, that had to be pretty cool.
Yeah, he wasn't too thrilled, only because when you get called up to the big leagues, everything is great. You get a first-class seat, you get all the perks. When you get sent down, you don't get that. When you get called up, you get to fly first class. So he wasn't too happy that I had a first-class seat, and he did not.
You set foot in the locker room with a whole bunch of all-stars, whether past or future, like Bonds and Galarraga and Santiago. What was that like for a younger kid making his major league debut?
It's nerve-wracking as can be, no matter who's in that locker room. When you get called up for the first time, that's a whole new ballgame. That's different than anything in the minor league. And you're playing in front of a packed house. I was fortunate enough in San Francisco, we always played in front of a packed house, no matter home or on the road because of Barry. So you had your guys that were there to comfort you and make you feel welcome. You had your guys that were the established big leaguers. And I walked in, I was just hoping for that opportunity. That September, I only got 5 at-bats. At that point, Galarraga was sitting on, I think, 295 home runs or 395, whatever it was. He needed like 5 more to get to that next 100. So he got a lot of playing time. We clinched the division pretty early that year. So I was hoping to get some more playing time, but Big Cat got it, and he was awesome. He was unbelievable. I was more than happy to just sit back and watch him play. And I got a few pinch hit at bats that September. Ended up the last game of the year going in, I think for JT Snow at that point, and getting my first hit against the Dodgers off Paul Shuey, an RBI double. So that was a huge thrill. At that point, I didn't care how many at bats I got in that September. Just to get that hit was awesome.
So what was it like to get the hit against the hated rival?
It was great, but I really didn't get to experience the rivalry. I was so young and only up for a month, and I don't even know if we went to Dodger Stadium that September. So I knew there was a rivalry, but when you're at home, everyone's cheering. It doesn't matter who you're playing. I really got to experience that rivalry once I was more established and ended up going to Dodger Stadium. That's when I really knew how much Dodger fans hate the Giants.
It's one of those rivalries that I don't think a lot of people realize that aren't on the West Coast, just how much hatred there is between those two fan bases.
There is. All sports on the West Coast don't get as much recognition as they do on the East Coast. The Giants-Dodgers rivalry, I've put up there with any of the others. It was rough. Always fights in the stands. More fights in LA than there was in San Francisco. I remember in spring training, and this was before the Dodgers had spring training in Arizona. They were still here in Florida. There was always a game or two where a group of Dodger fans, probably 40 or 50 of them, they would come to a game. They would all wear the blue Dodgers shirts. They had a huge banner. I can't say exactly what it said on it. Bad words about the Giants. And they would walk through Scottsdale Stadium, right through the concourse outside, and walk all the way around the field chanting, beat San Francisco. Beat LA was what we used to always say. They would say beat SF. And they would chant it, and all the Giants fans would boo them. But I just remember thinking, man, spring training is not even out here. And these guys are coming through our spring training game, not caring what people are going to say about them. That's a rivalry.
Pretty cool story, because I didn't realize it started in spring training.
Oh, yeah. Like I said, I think it was only one game they would do it, but, man, they were loud, and I would never go to Dodger Stadium to do that, I can tell you that.
So you get your first cup of coffee. The following year, you play a full season at AAA. Was there any kind of confidence setback in the fact that you didn't get called up again?
First game of spring training that year, we were in Mesa playing the Cubs, and at that point, it was a big deal that it was an ESPN game in spring training. And I think it was just because of Barry and I think Mark Pryor. It was a big deal. And we had a rain delay, and I remember JT Snow was playing first, and the field was pretty bad. But they were going to play that game because it was ESPN. So they took JT out, and about the second or third inning that I played, I went for a foul on the warning track by the bleachers, and I hit a patch of mud and then a dry patch, and I rolled my ankle and tore 3 ligaments in my ankle. I knew I was going to be out for some time at that point. Didn't play anymore that spring. I was in a walking boot and crutches. Started the season on the big league disabled list for a couple months. And then once I finally got healthy enough to play, went to San Jose and A-ball, and then I went up to AAA, kind of on a rehab. And I still had an option left, so they optioned me down to AAA. And I had a really good year, like probably the most home runs I had hit that year in the minor league. Hit over 300. Definitely thought I was going to get called up, and I didn't. That was a little demoralizing. I didn't really understand why. It had been my best year in the minor leagues. I understand that I had an injury and missed some time, but I didn't really understand why. And if I go back and look at it now, I could probably figure out why. Maybe they didn't have a need for me. Other guys they had to call up, whatever it was. But that hurt. I definitely used that as some motivation that off season to really try to get my ankle healthy, to get bigger and stronger. And I really wanted to make the team out of spring the next year, which did not happen.
I remember I was in the ESPN Classic and we all cringed.
That was me. I wanted to watch it again when I got in, and I asked, can I go back and see what I did? Because I don't really remember. And I was like, I want to go back and look at it. And our trainers looked at me and said, no, you don't want to see it. I said, okay, I won't look at it.
Just from what I remember, it kind of reminded me of what Robin Ventura did. I don't know if you remember his ankle injury.
Yes, I do remember that. Luckily, I didn't have a bone coming out of my ankle. It was tough. Even when I thought I was ready to get back out there, any little wrong movement, and that happened a couple times where towards the end of spring, I would even just try to go stand on first base during batting practice and take throws. I remember one time AJ Przinsky hit a ball that bounced over the net at first base, and I tried to get out of the way real quick, and it aggravated again, and I was out for about 3 more weeks after that.
You got sent down to start the 2005 season. How did you use that as motivation to get back to the big club?
The last day of spring training, me and a pitcher named Kevin Correa both thought that we had a chance to make the team, and we both got sent down to Fresno AAA the last day, and we were pretty upset. There was no, we're going to use this as motivation. We were PO'd by it. We go down, and we play our first game in AAA, and I remember in the 8th inning, I was trying to beat out a ground ball to first base, and I felt something in my hamstring a little bit, just got tight on me, and I didn't say anything, thank goodness. Finished the game, only 1 more inning. I didn't go in the training room or anything, and that night, Kevin and myself, we had a long night. We're going to stay up all night. We're going to enjoy this night. I woke up to my phone ringing the next day at probably 11 a.m. My phone rang, and it was Bobby Evans with the Giants, and he said, "Hey, we're putting Moises Alou on the disabled list. Need you to get on a plane about an hour out of Fresno." I didn't have a car, so I said, "Bobby, I'm going to try to make it. I'll do everything I can." And I had to go into the field, and from the field to the airport, and I missed that plane. Hopped on another puddle jumper from Fresno to San Francisco, got a cab from the airport. I remember getting to the field at 6:15. At that point, we had a 7:15 start. I don't know why it was 7:15, but it was. Walk in, and I looked at the lineup, and I was hitting third. And I was like, oh, I guess there's no time to get nervous for this. I had to real quick unpack my stuff and get dressed. I went to the cages, took a couple swings, went out on the field, got my arm loose, and the game started. Fortunately, stayed up that whole year and had a really good year. I was platooned with JT Snow. I was facing lefties. He was facing righties. There were some times when I got to face the righties. We would face guys like Clemens, Maddox, Smoltz. Those are the guys that I got to face that were right-handed, but had a really good year. They had told me originally it was only going to be until Moises came off the disabled list, but I'd done well enough in those 2 or 3 weeks that he was on the DL where I'd hit a couple home runs, was hitting over 300, playing a good first base. Fortunately for me, they kept me, and they ended up sending down a guy named Tony Torquato, who was one of my good friends. But at that point, it was one or the other. Hated to be one of your friends that has to be sent down, taken off the roster. But then I got to stay, and that's how it was.
You're called up and you're hitting third. That's right in front of Bonds, correct?
Yes, it was. I hit in front of Barry quite a bit, but I fluctuated from third down to seventh every once in a while. But yeah, I had a good majority where I was hitting third and Barry was hitting fourth. That was some pressure right there of when you come up with first and third situation, 1 out, of being told by Barry, just don't hit into a double play. Whatever you do, don't hit into a double play. And at that point, I was thinking, man, what a turd telling me this stuff instead of trying to give me confidence. But it was all about if I hit into a double play, the inning's over. And it doesn't matter who was hitting behind me. But at that point, it was Barry, and he was trying to teach me some lessons. But I think instead of it being a learning lesson, it was fearful of just don't do this. It doesn't matter if you strike out or not. Just don't hit into a double play.
The comedic punchline would be your first at bat, you hit into a double play, but I hope that's not the case.
I don't remember my first at bat. I know I got a hit that game, but I remember we played the Rockies. I faced Jeff Francis, but I don't remember what I did.
What was it like sharing a locker room with Bonds, aside from the fact that he was telling you not to ground into a double play?
It was different. The most prolific player in baseball, the most ungodly talent you can imagine. Just watching him on a daily basis was just amazing. And I was on the field with it. Fields were packed for batting practice to watch him. I mean, it was amazing. But when you have someone like that, all the attention's on that team. Everywhere we went was crowded every single day with media trying to get to Barry. We'd have to call players only meetings just to get the media out. Even though we wouldn't have a meeting, we had to say we were, just so you could even get to your locker to get ready. And especially the bigger markets, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago. I mean, it was crazy. That's how it was for him everywhere. He couldn't go out to get dinner. He couldn't do anything just because everyone just swarmed him and was trying to get a piece of him. And Barry was very guarded by that. And a lot of that transitioned into the locker room too, where he was your teammate, yes, and he helped you win a lot of games, but it was hard to be a really good teammate just because he just had this guard around him that he always had to have. And I don't know if he knew how to do it another way. And it's unfortunate because a lot of us younger guys didn't get to have a great experience with Barry just because a lot of times we didn't know how to, we weren't allowed to. And everything at that point in San Francisco was kind of built around Barry. He was chasing the home run record, putting up these ridiculous numbers, and kind of took away from us younger guys. I said my kids watch the Phillies. We watch the Phillies every night, and I look how much fun that team has. I would have loved to have had that experience, but we really couldn't with everything that was going on with Barry at that time.
Who on the Giants took you under their wing to help you navigate the waters in your first full season?
JT Snow was great to me. Even though we were both playing for the same position, he was awesome and taught me a lot about first base. Ray Durham, who played second base, really helped on the road, the ins and outs of what we do and what we don't do. By far, one of the most influential that I ever got to play with was Mike Matheny. He was just an unbelievable human being, baseball talent aside, and his work ethic aside, what he did to make himself better. But just as a human being and the faith that he had in his religion and how his family handled themselves and his kids when they were in the locker room. And I didn't have kids at the time. And I remember his kids weren't allowed in the locker room unless they had done all their schoolwork. Didn't matter if we won or not. They prayed as a family together before all their meals, whether inside the locker room or out at a restaurant. And I sat behind Mike on airplanes, and he would give me a book. I remember he gave me a book called Wild at Heart one time, kind of a spiritual walk. I didn't think much of it at the time. I still have it. I saw Mike a couple of years ago and told him that I still had the book, and just little things he would say and do, and whether it related to baseball or just life, he was an unbelievable person and someone that I'm so happy that I got to play with, but even more happy that I got to know and to spend a year or so with. And fortunately for Mike, he got a couple of concussions that ended his career early, and health-wise, it was rough on him, and thankfully everything's fine with him now, but just what a great person he was, and it made a huge impact.
What have you taken from Mike Matheny that you've used as a baseball coach to get your players to improve and get better?
Spring training one time, I think it might have been first week of spring training, we were going on the road, and we get there in the morning and the list is up of who is and isn't going on the road. And I was not going, and I was happy. I was like, sweet, this is an off day, go play golf. Me and the other guys that weren't going and some of the pitchers were like, boom, let's go make a tee time. Let's get out of here after we hit. I remember sitting in the dugout, and I might have even been looking up which golf course we were going to play. And Mike came out, and this is our first spring together. I didn't even really know him too well. He came out in the dugout, and he sat down, and he goes, I saw you're not going on the road. And I was like, no, I'm not. He goes, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to go play golf. And he goes, okay. He goes, you know Albert Pujols, right? Mike had come from St. Louis, and I was like, everyone knows Albert Pujols. He goes, yeah. He goes, he would never accept the day off in spring training because he always thought that by playing in the game, you have a chance to do something. Whether it's get a game-winning hit, they can play on defense, hit 5 home runs in a game, do something that helps the team win or something that's never been done before. And if he's not playing, he doesn't have that opportunity to do it. So he said, I remember one day when Pujols wasn't in the lineup for a spring training game, and he went into La Russa's office and told La Russa, I don't care what you say, I'm going and I'm playing. And Mike kind of put his arm on my shoulder and said, but that's just Albert Pujols, and walked out. And I about wanted to cry for thinking I'm happy that I'm getting a day off and going golfing when one of the best players in baseball wouldn't accept that. So it showed me right there, I got to change my priorities here. The grind can get long, having an off day is nice, but that's not what it's about. It's about playing. It's about trying to stay. And if Albert Pujols has that mentality and he's one of the best in baseball, how can I not have that mentality? So I talk to my guys a lot about that. And if you don't want to do something, listen to the story. Listen to what Albert Pujols would do. If he wanted to do this, why are we not willing? It doesn't have to be about playing time. It can be about anything, just work ethic. But when Mike told me that, that kind of shifted my mind a little bit. I think I still went golfing that day because I was young. And if I would have went on and told Felipe that I was playing, he probably would have just said, no, you're not. Get out of here. Those are little things that Mike would do to shift your mind in the right direction.
For listeners who don't know, Mike ended up becoming a manager and leading the Cardinals to a pennant about a decade ago.
Yeah, there. And then he was with Kansas City. I'm not sure why he got let go in St. Louis. I wasn't happy about that, but baseball is a business, so decisions are made. But I know whatever Mike's doing, he's going to be happy.
Your 2005 season's pretty good. 12 homers, 46 or something RBI. That seems to be a season that you can kind of build on. Were you able to do that?
I wanted to. I knew I was going to make the team out of spring training and something that I wanted to build off and improve on. it just didn't happen. Had a couple small injuries, missed some time with, but just offensively, things didn't click as much as they did the year before, and got sent down for a little bit during that year, which was probably warranted. That was kind of the year that things started to go down for me with my baseball career.
At the end of that season or right after, you had a pretty life-changing moment with your dad passing away. How much did that affect you?
A ton. That was really hard, baseball-wise, coming off the year that I didn't have. But then when that happened in October, that was really tough on me. I had so many memories in my childhood of baseball with my dad and fishing with my dad and being really close with them. When that happened, it was tough to try to start focusing back on baseball and working out and getting in good shape. And I remember my dad had a really good friend at the time. His name was Dave Bergman, played with the Tigers. Dave had set up a trainer for me here in Lakeland that was a trainer with the Tigers, a strength and conditioning coach, set it up for him to start working me out just because he was trying to get me out and trying to get me to do something. And that was tough. And I went in the spring and tried to really focus on baseball, but it was tough too. Just everything with baseball just reminded me of my dad because that's where some of my memories were. So it was tough. I ended up making the team out of spring training that year, but had very limited playing time. I think only 17 at bats. That year we had signed Ryan Klesko to come into first and Rich Aurelia to come back to San Francisco and to play first. So the playing time really wasn't there. And a couple months in the season, I got taken off the roster and sent down to AAA. Played a little bit there and then got hit with a pitch and broke my thumb and missed some time and eventually not re-signed by the Giants after the season. And I wanted to keep playing just because I didn't know what else to do, but also didn't want to keep playing. Signed with Houston, went to AAA in Round Rock, Texas, and only lasted a couple months there and got released. At that point, I was so done with it, I didn't even try to do anything after that. My agent had probably tried to give me some other spots, but I was just done. I didn't want to do it anymore. Didn't know what I wanted to do, but didn't want to do that. Came back home and just worked some odds and ends jobs and actually went back and tried to pitch a year with the Braves, throwing a knuckleball, which I told my uncle that I would try if it ever came down to it. I did it for a year. They were going to give me 2 years, but after that first year, my wife was pregnant with our first kid, and I decided it was time to hang it up rather than try to start over. So that was it. And then not long after that, the position at Florida Southern opened up in assistant coaching. I called the athletic director, who was one of my coaches when I played here, and it wasn't a couple days into it after that I got hired on as the assistant coach, and the next year was the head coach.
You mentioned Dave Bergman. I went to a baseball game in Toronto where they played the Tigers, and Bergman started at first over Cecil Fielder, and that was the year that Cecil hit 50.
As a fan, yeah, you don't want that to happen. Dave and my dad were best friends, and actually Dave's son Troy were about a month apart on our birthdays, and Troy and I are best friends. And unfortunately, Dave got cancer a while back and died, probably been 7 or 8 years now, but he was another unbelievable person, fortunate enough to have in my life, and still fortunate to have Troy in my life. But Dave was there for me a lot when I needed him after my dad died.
After your dad passed, was your Uncle Phil able to kind of fill a little bit of that void as well?
He was there for me, whether it was just a phone call or going to visit him or play golf with him or whatever it was. But yeah, he was a huge family man. He's always been there for his nieces, nephews, cousins, whoever it was. So he was definitely part of my support group after that.
You get hired to be an assistant at Florida Southern, and the following year get named the head baseball coach. What has that been like for you, transitioning from the player side to the coaching side?
I've loved it. It was a whole different thing coming back into the college side versus being on the professional side for 8 to 10 years, realizing you got to get back to the basics a little more and dealing with younger kids that didn't have the talent to get drafted to move on to the minor leagues right away. So it was an adjustment period for me. It took a little while, a few years, to really figure out what type of coach I am. College coaches have the stigma of being the yellers and screamers, my way or the highway, and a lot of running. And I experimented with that, and it was fake. I'm more laid back, be there for the guys and be able to joke around with them is what I enjoy. And I've enjoyed coaching a lot more than what I thought I was going to. I decided to get into it just because it was back into baseball. It wasn't working a normal job, which I tried. I've definitely enjoyed it a lot more than I thought I was going to.
What has kept you at Florida Southern for 10 years? I know it's your alma mater, but there has to be something there that you say, you know what, I really like it here.
It's comforting for our family. My mom lives 2 streets away. My wife's parents live in Lakeland. My wife's brother lives in Lakeland with his wife and their kids. It's home for us. My wife is basically from Lakeland. Our kids are happy here. They love it here. There's not really a need to look somewhere else at this time. And family is most important. And as a family, we're happy here.
We've talked a lot about your dad, but what role has your mom played, especially when you were so young and your dad was on the road a lot?
She was huge. I mean, she's what kept us together. Even before my parents got divorced, it was almost like a single mom just because we always had our home in Florida, no matter where my dad was playing. So we always went to school here and we'd travel up on any breaks we had or summers or weekends or things like that. So it kept us all together, basically, because she did everything behind the scenes. So she was always there for us, me and my sister, as we were kids. And as my career went on in baseball, she was always there with support, even though it was tough to be playing on the West Coast the majority of the time. But now at Florida Southern, basically, she comes to almost every game. She doesn't go on the road trips, but most every home game just out of support.
What's a treasured memory you have with your mom away from the baseball field?
Oh, man, probably going to the beach. She's always loved the beach. I remember growing up, always every summer, it was me and one of my friends, and then one of her friends would bring her kid and her friend. And I just remember going over to Longville Key and staying at the Diplomat Hotel and being on the beach for a week or two. And we actually just did that a couple weeks ago. She took my older son over for a couple nights. And then one day, me and my wife and our younger son drove over and spent the day and brought back a lot of memories from what we used to do when I was younger.
Man, I love Longboat Key. That might be my top 2 favorite beaches in the U.S.
It's an unbelievable, laid back, not crowded at all. Yeah, we love it there.
You ever go grab a meal at the Lazy Lobster?
She's been there before. We have a few more restaurants that are really close by. The Dry Dock and Salty Dog that we go to most of the time.
The Salty Dog makes a really good burger.
They do. I just had it a couple weeks ago.
Couple last things. The first one is your dad had only one home run and it was hit off your uncle. At family gatherings, did he ever hold that over your uncle's head?
Never. He had such admiration and respect for Phil and that being his big brother and the career that he had. He never talked about it. I asked him one time and he told me the story, but other than that, I never heard him mention it. That's something that you think you'd want to brag about all the time, but never mention it, especially not with Phil around.
So let's say in 10 years, where do you see Lance Niekro?
Probably about right where I am right now. I'd be happy if that was the case, unless I win the lottery. It's been an aspiration of mine for a few years, so unless that happens, I'd be happy right here.
Coach, I want to thank you so much for being on the show and telling us about your stories with baseball, fishing with your dad, and now being a head baseball coach at Florida Southern. Best of luck this season, and thanks again.
I really appreciate you having me on and giving me the opportunity to tell my story, and it's been a lot of fun.